Okay, today we're going to start a new unit on adaptation. And this is part of the life science. This is the beginning of life science. So we're going to talk about adaptations today. The definition of an adaptation is an inherited trait or learned behavior that helps an organism survive. We're going to get into inherited traits and learned behaviors a little further down the road. But an inherited trait is something that you're born with. For example, your red hair or your blue eyes or the color of your skin. And a learned behavior is something that you learn to do, say play football or ride a bike or write in cursive or something like that. But an adaptation are those things that help an organism survive or to stay alive. Okay, so to talk about adaptations, the first thing we're going to talk about is structure. And this was part of your vocabulary. So you should be aware already what a structure is, but I'll go over it. Is its body part. Okay, its body part. My arm, my leg, a dog's tail, a whale's flipper, all of those things are its structure. So let's pick an animal that we can talk about. So let's talk about, for example, the structure of a beaver. Okay, so we have here little Mr. Beaver. Let's see if I can kind of draw, got his little teethies there. And if I can draw Bucky little beaver, and I'm not really good at beavers, but if we were to look at the structures of Mr. Beaver here, he has a lot of things, body parts that are adapted. That's an inherited trait, he's born with it, that help him survive. And of course the very first one that we notice is this great big old tail here. We'll call that a paddle tail. And that tail is not only helps him swim, but it also helps him build his home. So he drags his little twigs and his trees and the mud that he carries in his mouth, and he drags it over to build either his home or his dam, and he uses that paddle tail like a paddle and to press down the dirt or the leaves or the twigs or the trees to make it sturdier. Okay, so that's the first known feature or a structure of this beaver that is an adaptation. Okay, the second one would be his fur. I don't know if you've ever seen a beaver. His fur is very, very, very thick, meaning there are lots of hairs per square inch. And it also has an oil base to it. So what do you think that fur is helping him do? Yeah, it's helping him to keep him either warm or dry. Okay, warm or dry. Okay, because if he was to get wet and get chilled and get cold, what would happen to him? He would get sick and he would die. And this is used to build home, okay, or swim. All right, so the next feature that we want to look at, besides the paddle tail and the fur, are his webbed feet. He has webbed feet. In between his toes, so this is a toe, and this is a toe, and this is a toe, and then this is a toe. So here's the toes. In between it is this webbing, and this webbing helps him to do what? Swim. Yeah, it helps him swim. Another feature that we have on Mr. Beaver, of course, is his big buck teeth. His teeth. And they are specifically designed. He's a rodent. He's a very large rodent, but he's in the family of mice and rats and squirrels and things like that. But his teeth are much larger than, say, a rabbit's, and they're much thicker and much stronger, because what he does with his teeth, he cuts down trees. He cuts down trees with his teeth. Now, the whole idea on a beaver is to live in a pond, and he has to have water. And so it may be a creek or something, and he wants to make the creek into a pond, and so he cuts down these trees and he drags them over and he builds a dam, and that backs the water up, and now he has a nice little pond. And then he also uses those teeth to cut down things to build his home. He lives in a little dome kind of shaped little hut. He doesn't get to it from the top. They swim underneath it, and they come up through a little hole, and that keeps them nice and safe and dry and warm. Another structure that is an adaptation are his little ears. I guess I should put 2 little ears. He has very small ears. Small ears. And you think, well, why is that an adaptation? Well, where does he spend 90% of his time? He spends 90% of his time in the water. And just like you, when you go swimming, if you get water in your ears, what happens? You get an ear infection. And so he has very small ears that when he does go swimming, that lay flat against his head, and it keeps the water out. Keeps the water out. Keeps the water out. So he stays nice and healthy, and he doesn't get an ear infection. So that's just some of the adaptations that you have on Mr. Beaver. Okay. So and when we talk about structures, we also have to talk about these things here are its functions. Functions, meaning what is it used for? Function. These are its functions. So every structure has a function. We have fingers and a thumb to help us grab things. So our fingers and our thumb are our structure. The function is to grab things. So each one of these, each structure has a function. Okay, function. Okay, so the next thing that I want to talk about, because I'm trying to keep this really kind of short, is the habitats. Okay, so I'm going to erase Mr. Beaver here, say goodbye to Mr. Beaver. And everybody knows what a habitat is. Habitat is kind of the place where something lives. It's place or environment. Okay. In which an organism, and when we talk about organism here, like here, we use the word organism and not animal, because it can also include what? Plants. So it can be plants or animals, and an organism naturally lives. Naturally lives. So where does Mr. Beaver live? Mr. Beaver lives in areas that there's a lot of water. You wouldn't find Mr. Beaver in a desert. You won't find him in the Arctic. You will find him in cold areas. He prefers cold areas. But we have beavers around here. I saw the other day, I was driving up to Whitesboro across the Tioga Bridge, and sad to say, somebody had run over a little beaver up there. So they do live in areas where there is water. So that's their habitat. We're only going to focus in on four habitats. The first being aquatic, just like the word Aquaman. Well, where does Aquaman live? And this is a water environment. Water. Okay? And it could be anything. It could be a lake. It could be a stream, a creek, an ocean, a sea, anything that has water in it is aquatic. The next one that we're going to talk about is prairie land. And a prairie land is anywhere that there are plains, meaning the land is flat, plains, and grass grows, grasslands. Okay? So these would, animals like buffalo would be a prairie land, rabbits, prairie land, hawks, eagles, things like that are all prairie land. Our next one is the jungle. Jungle, and this is rainforest. Okay, we're talking about something along the Amazon rainforest, or in Africa, there in that Congo belt that has jungle. And the animals that you are going to find there, or organisms, not just necessarily animals, are going to be suited for the rainforest. Okay, and our last one is the Arctic. Now, I say Arctic, but this also includes Antarctica. And this is anything where the land is frozen. So it's not only the Arctic, which is up north, but it also includes the Antarctic, which is in the south. Okay? So if we're talking about some animals in our aquatic, some of the animals might be fish, whales, seals, penguins, even though they do spend some of their time, and this could be interchangeable with Arctic depending on what type of penguin it is. And I think I may take that one off, because I think I'll put him in the Arctic. But there are penguins that do not live in frozen areas. I guess they're warm weather penguins. But seals, the coral reefs, that's all aquatic. Prairie land, you're going to get things like buffalo, coyotes, hawks. See what else? Hawks. What else? Give me one more. A plant that lives out there. Trees. I'll be trying to think of one. Can't think of one. Buffalo, coyote. How about prairie dogs? It's got the name prairie in it. A prairie dog is related to the beaver. It's also a rodent. Okay, in the jungle, some of the things that you're going to get some really tall trees. And that's because they're trying to get up towards the sun. Let's put a comma there. Tall trees, you're going to have jaguars. You're going to get things like monkeys, all kinds of like spider monkeys and things like that. Monkeys, jaguars, what else is living in the jungle? Parrots, which live in the trees. Okay, included a bird there. And then in our Arctic, our list gets a little harder to do. We do have like penguins. Now the penguins do not live in the North Pole. All penguins that are in the cold areas are in Antarctica. Penguins, some types of seals, polar bears, and Arctic foxes. Later on, you're going to do an exercise where I'm going to give you some of these animals, and you have to give me a special structure that they have, the habitat that they live in, the function of that structure. So, yeah. All right, so that's just the beginning of adaptations. Like I said, there will be a quiz over this. There's also going to be a worksheet I'm going to try to get together. Like I said, I'm going to give you about 16 plants and animals. You have to tell me what habitat they live in, what special structure they have, what is the function of that structure, and you're going to type that all in and turn it in. I'm hoping you're having a great day. It's beautiful weather outside. If you can, get out and get some sunshine, and hopefully we'll be back together soon.